Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Suburbicon from 2017. Now, if you haven't heard of this film or aren't aware of it, that's because it was a flop. But the reason I watched it is because a couple of weeks ago, when I was watching Intolerable Cruelty, I stumbled upon the fact that at the time that Intolerable Cruelty was being made, that being 2003, the Coens had already written this script. In fact, it turns out they wrote this script in 1986. Now, this is a Coen Brothers script, but it is not directed by either of the Coen Brothers. It's actually directed by George Clooney, which is especially fascinating because not only did Clooney not have any directorship position for a while after Intolerable Cruelty, but he specifically, in an interview, made mention of the fact of how he had seen that script. And I don't remember if he said he had been through a casting process or something for it, or how he had seen it. The Coens are very chummy with a lot of their actors. So anyway, for one reason or another, he had seen that script and liked it a lot and made an offhand comment about how much he wanted to see it get made. So from 1986, 2003 to 2017, this film eventually got made. Interestingly enough, as directed by George Clooney. Now, I think I've only seen one other film that George Clooney has directed. To my recollection, he's a perfectly competent director. Certainly not a bad one, which is always a little bit of a concern when actors turn into directors or producers or whatever else. But I think he's more than competent behind the camera, and this film is no exception. We'll get a little into the details of that when we get further in. However, I think I know why this film flopped, and that is despite competent directorship, a competent script, and overall a lot of good aspects to it. But I'm gonna leave you hanging on that, and we'll come back to it. So, where do I start with this? This is sort of a dark comedy film, very much in the vein of typical Coen Brothers fare. And the Coen Brothers have always had a particular knack for writing not just crime and dark comedy stuff, but they have a particular knack for integrating social, economic, racial, religious issues in ways that are not only nuanced, but tend to take a sort of different perspective, like a different angle to look at some of those things. And it's one of those things that I've always really appreciated, even when it's not super overt. I think if you haven't noticed that before, going back and rewatching some of their stuff or even just reconsidering it, I think it's very evident once you realize it, how common those themes are in their works. And this film is no exception. However, it handles some of the things they want to address in a way that's ultimately a little sloppy. And I think this is, in fact, the fault of the script and not the fault of the directorship. Although, for all I know, it could have been a matter of the production house getting in the way and making edits. It's always hard to say with these things. So I want to talk about the plot a little bit very briefly, and I'm going to do it in a way that I don't think is spoilers at all, and then talk about the themes that they're trying to address. Again, I don't really think this is spoilery, but I'm not going to put a timestamp on screen, am I? Maybe I am. I don't know. If you really want to ultimately avoid any possibility at all, I don't know. Maybe I put a time up. So the film opens with a very sort of over-exaggerated version of sort of the 50s suburbia. This sort of idea, this idea of suburbia as imagined in the, the way people reminisce about suburbia when they have no idea what, the reality of that time period was like. It is immediately punctuated by the very overt showing that a black family has moved into this suburban neighborhood, and everybody's gonna lose their shit. And that is a little surprising right off the bat, because you meet this family before you meet ostensibly the main characters. And because Matt Damon is front and center on the poster, which, well, I won't get into all that. It's a little jarring. Ultimately, and here's the 30 seconds to skip if you don't want to hear anything about themes at all. Ultimately, the film is about, I think the film is about the juxtaposition of the imagined reality of suburbia, where a black family moves in and people think that they're awful, despite the fact that they're like more than model citizens, versus the people next door who are insane sociopaths and a menace to everyone around them. And this this racial denial that this imagined threat versus the real threat, this denial that there could be anything wrong with, your own race, versus and placing the blame of all of your ills on other people who you can scapegoat for being other. Unfortunately, the way they deliver that is pretty ham-fisted. And despite it being so ham-fisted, I don't think a lot of people caught on. It's pretty clear from the very bad reviews, both from critics and, just people on the various review sites, that people don't clue into sort of the core of what that's about. And like I said, it could be handled better, because ultimately the family who's moved in aren't really characters. They are there basically as a storytelling tool to show this juxtaposition and this meta-narrative that the story is trying to tell. And I think what they should have done is go one way or the other. Either make them more characters or less characters. But as it is, it's a little sloppy. That said, having only come off watching it maybe 15 minutes ago, I still think I kind of really like this movie. There's so many things that it does really well, and are entertaining in their own right, that I can forgive a lot of its sins. It, like I said, it's got a lot of the Coen brothers hallmarks. The crime, dark comedy, social commentary, exaggerated, exaggerated people, like all these sorts of things. And I think while it doesn't look like a Coen Brothers film, I still think that Clooney does an admirable job of directing it in a way that really, really works for a Coen Brothers script. I can't recall. I think there's certainly a few other films that the Coen Brothers have written the script and then other people have directed. I can't remember them off the top of my head, so I can't remember if anyone else has done them particularly well. But I do think there is something about a Coen Brothers script that can't just be thrown to any hack director and just executed on. There's a certain rhythm and a certain nuance that I think has to be executed on properly or it'll flop. And I don't think this film has any of those problems with it. Overall, the general plot of most of the film actually works quite well in a vacuum. The framing device, as I've mentioned, sort of falls apart or doesn't quite mesh the way one would hope. But it's not completely lost either. I wouldn't go so far to say that it's less than the sum of its parts there. But it does have some issues. As far as the acting goes, the acting's extraordinary. Well, okay, let me back that up a little bit. It's not extraordinary. It's very good. I think universally across the board, all of the actors do their jobs excellently. Special shout out to, this isn't a spoiler to the scene. There is a scene right at the beginning of the movie, and there are two women on the porch, and it took me until after the scene had ended to realize that both of the women were Julianne Moore. It didn't register to me that it was the same person talking to each other. And that is a credit not only to the directorship and the editing and the effects people, but also the makeup and costuming and all these other things, as well as Julianne Moore herself for, acting in two different ways. It's fantastic. It's great. I mean, I guess now that I've told you, you won't get to notice, but maybe you're probably not an idiot like me. You probably would have noticed faster than I did. But it was just stood out to me as really, really excellent. Matt Damon he's fine. He might be sort of the weakest character overall. I think part of that is by virtue of the character he's intended to play is not supposed to have a huge amount of character. But even the kids, which again, you've heard me talk about this before, don't particularly like kids in films, but they're just fine. They do a good job. Happy with their performances too. So kind of across the board, all the performances are great. To the point before about the costuming and stuff and the sets, all great. As I mentioned earlier, I really appreciate that there's a visual style here that is not real. It is, I hesitate to say fantastical because that's not quite the right word, but there is an element of this imagined version of the 50s that is it's not overly exaggerated to the point of being like a pastiche or something like that, but it is very much unreal, if that makes sense. If you've watched this film or you're going to watch this film, I think that'll click pretty quickly. And a lot of that is sort of set by the very opening of the film. And they use that both visually to sort of exaggerate some of the ideas they're trying to get across. But they also sort of really, really like leverage the cinematic portion of the unreality of the world to do some great storytelling stuff where the distances between places and the absurdity of proximity and size and shape of places and and these other things like is all, if you're trying to analyze it and figure out how it all works together, it doesn't. But that's for the better because it adds to sort of the absurd nature of it. And I think that works really well. Again, that's a credit not only to the set people and the design people, but also to the directorship. It does bring me to one thing I don't particularly like, which is the soundtrack and sound effects work. It is very ham-fisted at times. It's relatively inoffensive most of the time. There's some points where it's like just way over the top, and I wish they had taken a much more minimalist approach. And I think it would have had more impact as a result. And again, like I think overall Clooney does a more than competent job directing. He doesn't have quite the finesse of the Coen brothers themselves, but like more than competent job. There's some genuinely really nice shots that are executed. There's a large variety of different types of filming work done as well. Close, far, perspective shots, forced camera and these exaggerated other shots, and just some really pretty effects that I think are all done. The ones I'm thinking of are done in camera. So credit to him for doing a good job there. Yeah, I mean, overall, the more I talk about it, the more I think about it. Like, for all the issues it has, I still really like this film. And I might mellow on it later. But yeah, as it is, I mean, for it not being super clear what the film is in the first place, I came out of it enjoying it more than I expected to, I guess. I don't know. It's a Coen Brothers script. I'm probably going to like it. But, everything else works pretty well too. Anyway, that's about all my thoughts on this. I'm probably going to forget to edit the stuff, so hopefully nobody's too spoiled on this. But, you're watching the video. It's up to you. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I will see you guys next time.